Hi everyone! Hi everyone, it's me, and today let's watch the game Theorists! Yeah. Let's start! The signs off!
Dear NVIDIA? Hi, it's me, Austin? Do I have that right, NVIDIA? I mean, I did write this script and I'm reading off of it right now, but NVIDIA doesn't make games, do they? Okay, alright, you know what? Let's just cut the crap. You saw the title, carefully crafted out of only the best organic farm-to-table bits available by Amy and Jason. No need for me to ramble on incessantly or talk about my personal life at all. This is gonna be a long one, so let's stay focused and on topic.
Let's go! Focused and on topic. Let's go.
Ray tracing! It's the way of the future for computer graphics, or rather, the past of computer graphics. Confused? Me too! Or at least I was until I finally went on a deep dive of what ray tracing actually is, and it is utterly fascinating. And I'll be honest, what finally made me decide to look at this with the scrutiny it deserves was when I saw that the next Five Nights at Freddy's
FNAF again!
game is gonna have ray-traced graphics. Really? Really? You're just gonna... No, okay, you know what? And Fortnite has it too. Not that you can really tell the difference between ray tracing and rasterizing. And since I currently have an RTX 2070S in the mail? Question mark? Come on, K-West, please don't be a scam! It is high time I find out what this stupid thing is and why it seems to be everywhere all of a sudden. They even ported it into the Quake engine of all things, which means... Wait a second. Just give me... Never mind, it was all worth it! Yeah!
Jedi Academy, Ray Tracing, the Jedi, Star Wars.
Okay, again, focus, Austin. Ray tracing. How do they work? And if you were like me, you were just like, yeah, it's a new techno-babble thing for better graphics, and you left it at that. And if that's what you thought, you know, you're not that far off. It is better graphics, period. End of story. But it's not better graphics in the traditional way of just shoving more teraflops into a single piece of silicon. It's an entirely new way of rendering game graphics that, when it's widespread and the technology is finally available to everyone because cryptocurrency has crashed for the 50th time so people can actually buy the dang cards. It will make gaming a heck of a lot more enjoyable and immersive. Probably, or it'll take a nosedive into oblivion when someone finds a way to make rasterization 1,000 times better. But there's the key, right? Rasterization. Actually, that is a good idea. Let's take two
Ray Tracing, Rasterization.
Giant steps back, because if you're anything like me about a month ago, you never really considered how graphics get from your game to your graphics card to your HDMI cable to your screen. You can probably handle how it gets from the screen to your eyes though, right? It's light. Anyway, if you're an idiot like I was and have no idea how computer graphics work or how they've worked in the past several decades, you really cannot understand why ray tracing in real time is such a big deal. So first, rasterization. Rasterization is not the only way to do true 3D graphics. There's also voxels, which we're just not going to get into, but I know if I don't mention it, someone in the comments will, and oi! Anyway. Rasterization is the primary way video games that are 3D have been rendered for basically the entire existence of 3D computer games, and rasterization is how you take polygons or many-sided shapes like squares, triangles, all that stuff, and turn them into something that looks and feels three-dimensional. For a lot
looks and feels like three-dimensional.
of years, the only thing that was really making graphics better, aside from some lighting improvements, was upping the amount of polygons you could render per second. Star Fox for the Super Nintendo, for example, could handle about 1,000 polygons per second. The PS1, by contrast, could handle over 90,000 per second. Pretty impressive improvement. This model I downloaded, however, of the Fallen Knight from Dark Souls 3 has over 42,000 1,000 polygons in itself alone, meaning if I ported it to the PS1 somehow, it'd only be able to render about 2 frames a second. That said, it actually could render it, which is pretty impressive, honestly. Nowadays, we can put so many polygons in a model that to our eyes, it looks essentially smooth, especially with the work of clever shaders and post-processing, and it's not really that important. What is important is that polygons are how rasterization works. Using polygons of consistent sizes and shapes makes it really easy for a computer to assess how far away they are or what angle they're at to the camera. If you know your triangle always looks like this when it's head on and it's tilted this way, the computer can pretty quickly determine what that means for angles and distances and all that good stuff. And in order to do this, a computer breaks a scene like, this one into a grid. This is actually called a raster, so it's actually the cornerstone of this entire technology. Everything that's within this raster, basically your field of view or screen or camera, is what the computer processes for you. In order to translate this admittedly rough approximation to 3D into a flat image, first your computer draws the background block, then it draws Freddy, then the floor, then the Goomba, and something looks wrong here, doesn't it? Yeah, it's definitely wrong. Everything's in the wrong order. So have the computer render stuff closest to furthest? Well, no, it can't really do that either. I personally do not know why. I am not a computer scientist, but computer scientists tell me that you cannot do this. Instead, your computer does something really clever. It stores the depth as its own separate image, where things that are closer are a darker color than things that are further away. And for
a lot of science stuff.
Any given pixel, it will only draw the pixel for the object that's darkest in that spot. This is what's called a Z map, or a Z map if you're from not America. Appropriately colored, this is what that looks like. And here, let's even show it with super low res to make it really obvious what's going on. This is what the scene looks like with a 16 by 12 grid. Your computer will go through and grab a Z value for everything that's on screen, which would look like this when it's done. Remember that closer objects are darker, and darker gets preferential treatment. When your computer goes from left to right, top to bottom, rendering pixel by pixel, picking the color, using the Z map as its guide, only renders a pixel for an object if its corresponding Z pixel is on screen. And when it's all done, it looks like this. With more complicated 3D examples, which I can actually simulate in After Effects. Tanya, get the lights! That's better. Most modern rasterized games use what's called Gouraud shading, or sometimes Phong shading, which lights individual polygons by a certain amount relative to how far away they are from the light source, or they're occluded by something and they cast a shadow, and that is rasterization technology. And it's carried us from Battlezone in 1980, a game which rules, by the way, all the way, well, honestly, to every new release that's coming out today, and it is very good at what it does. All these things I mentioned, polygons, a Z-map, Gouraud, and Phong shading, plus some very specific post-processes that are designed especially to make the images this combination of processes produces look good. All these things combined are what we call rasterization. Take all the polygons hitting a given pixel location, pick the closest polygon and toss the others, color, shade it, anti-alias it, and all that jazz, and spit out an image to your screen. A simple, linear process that we call rasterization. And if I have time,
application, geometry, rasterization, display, and ta-da!
At the end, I will rant more about why I think that is a terrible name. But in the meantime, rasterization is not quite perfect. There are limitations. For instance, these specific rendering technologies have difficulty rendering reflections, which it turns out is kind of a huge deal. You can maybe at best get 1 or 2 reflections before the engines start to melt down. That's enough for a convincing mirror or water reflection or a window, but that's about it. And this is a big problem if you're trying to create realistic lighting conditions because, well, that's simply not how light works. In the real world, light from the sun, your monitor, your phone, lights, all of it is bouncing constantly from surface to surface, losing energy as it does until it eventually, I don't actually know what happens at the eventually. The very last photon bumps into something and gets absorbed. In any case, light bounces a bazillion times before this ever happens. It also passes through some objects and changes as it does, being bent this way and that. Some wavelengths are absorbed and it becomes colorized. I mean, just look around your room. White surfaces are casting the light of colored objects near them, appearing slightly the same shade. And all this light that's bouncing this way and that way is getting focused in past your pupil to little receptor sensors, also known as cones and rods, in the back of
the cones and rods of your eyes, in your eyes, literally in your eyes.
Of your eye. This information is beamed to your brain and decoded as an analog image, an incredibly unreliable one at that. And this is where ray tracing comes in. And it came into the scene a lot sooner than you might have expected. In 1980, let's just go back in time for a moment. It's just a jump to the left. While this wasn't the actual invention of ray tracing, that actually goes all the way back to 1968, believe it or not, this paper by Turner Whitted, an improved illumination model for shaded display, was the first major practical application of ray tracing, with actual renders using primitive ray tracing technology. Which, I mean, look at it! This is 1980, this looks really good! And it's here where we finally describe what ray tracing actually is. Remember before when I said that light bounces off of surfaces it hits and then hits your eyes and becomes an image? This is exactly what ray tracing does, but with a slight and clever twist. It works in the opposite direction. Believe it or not, this is actually how some early civilizations, including the Greeks and Indians, believed vision worked. They thought we were all shooting out laser beams from our eyes and painting whatever we saw.
What? Okay. OMG, mother got a job. It's like pew pew pew, shooting laser out of our eyes.
Love that. I wish that's how it worked. While absolutely goofy when it comes to human vision, emission theory, or if we want to be accurate, ray tracing operates on this exact same principle. You have a camera, or in this case a screen, facing this direction, toward a scene. The camera then shoots out a ray which travels forward until it hits something, then it bounces until it hits something else, and it does this a whole bunch of times until it's either told to stop or it hits a light source. And through all of these bounces, it's sending data back to the screen, or rather to the GPU, which will eventually paint something on the screen. It's sending distance, illumination, how many things are between it and the light source it hit, the whole caboodle. For example, if your first ray hits a spot that would be shaded and bounces toward a light source and hits something, then it knows that the area is in the shade. Meanwhile, if it bounces off and it hits a light source, it knows that the spot it hit is in the light, and it also knows how far away that object is from the screen, giving it size information. It's simple, right? Well, except it's not. One ray will at best give you 1 pixel of information, sometimes none at all. It could bounce off into some place outside the scene and just tell you nothing other than how far away the spot it hit is. It's not very useful. This is why ray tracing uses a lot, and I mean a lot of rays. The RTX 2070S can, in theory, output 7 giga-rays per second. That is 7 billion rays! That sounds like a lot, right? Oh, not even close. Ray tracing, which, by the way, the name comes from the fact that this technology has to keep track of the path rays take, aka trace them, has been used by movies for like ages. Pretty much all Pixar movies use ray tracing, and they've been using it for a while because of the amazing pictures they're capable of making. In 2006, Pixar rendering software developers wrote a paper detailing the processes and innovations they used to make the movie Cars, and in section 8, they say they shot out 100 million diffuse rays, 37 million specular rays, and 26 million shadow rays, just to render this demonstration image with a maximum reflection depth of 4, meaning rays could only bounce 4 times before no longer retrieving data. This picture took 106 minutes, or just over an hour and a half to render. Just one picture, one frame. Granted, this was only done on an Apple G5 with only 2 gigahertz of processing power through 2 cores and 2 gigs of memory.
Wow! Oh my gosh, 2 cores with 2 gigahertz and 2 GB memory.
But ray tracing in movies has only ever gone up, and the barriers to using it in games and real times has been a steep one. A game has to output a picture just about this size in HD every 33 milliseconds at minimum. Closing the gap from 106 minutes to 33 milliseconds is not as easy as it sounds, even if you take into account today's computers being faster by a huge margin. Modern computers would have to
Moore's Law!
speed this process up by at least 19 million%.
From 106 minutes becomes 33 seconds. And this thing, from 33 seconds, it can drop even lower and lower, right? That's just technology improving.
380 million % if we're talking about 60 frames per second here, and that would be to produce an image that looks like this. It's pretty good, but would you want to play a game that's just like, what, you and 15 old cars just sitting, just hanging out? I mean, I'm probably the only person who wants to, and I'm nuts! Why is this process so resource intensive though? I mean, call me crazy, but isn't it just tracing the path lines take? Can't a basic graphing calculator do that? And no, I mean, yes, but no. Tracing one line is pretty easy, but in order to capture those reflections and matte finishes, we're not talking about just one line. We're not even talking about just 150 million lines. Each time a ray hits a surface, it's oftentimes not just creating one more ray to capture the reflection, unless the surface is a perfect mirror. It's creating two, maybe as many as 4 more rays in the process. That means in just 4 bounces, like that image generated at Pixar, sending out as few as 100,000 rays can turn into 25 million rays. And if you use 1 ray per pixel on an HD monitor, the number jumps to over 540.8 million, like that. 4K and it's 2.1 billion, all of these being traced, calculated, filtered, and painted onto your screen in just 1/60th of a second. And then it has to render the next one, and the next one, and the next one 60 times. This means an HD monitor with only 1 ray per pixel initially used with just 4 bounces would require a card rated at 15.9 gigarays per second for just 30 frames per second frame rate, 31.9 billion if you're doing 60. That means the RTX 3090, the best ray tracing card from NVIDIA, I'm really sorry, which is only capable of outputting 10 gigarays per second in perfect conditions, is not capable of rendering a scene with that many reflections with just 1 initial ray sent out per pixel. You can manage 3 reflections though, probably, although that is assuming a lot. And even then, the image probably wouldn't be that good. It'd be very basic and frankly, not that great. Giant movie studios like Pixar can afford to film an entire movie with just ray tracing and 3,000 samples per pixel because they can afford to take 29 hours to render a single frame. One of the reasons it's computationally demanding has to do with the workflow, the path all this data takes before it reaches the make a pixel stage. Old rastering technologies were linear. Draw your polygon, shade it, do some other post-processing, rasterize, shade the raster, render to the screen. Done. Ray tracing, on the other hand, it's recursive. You generate a ray, you chart its path, you shade it, then you do it all over again for the same ray. The explanation for why this has to happen is kind of difficult and complicated, and it involves this formula, but it's a much more demanding process, which again, for 1 ray, isn't all that bad. But if your computer is calculating billions of these things every second just for 1 game, it can get a little out of hand. On top of all of that, images that are developed using only ray tracing are a mess, because all it's doing is tracing the path that rays take. You get this kind of pointy picture that frankly looks kind of terrible. So after all that, it has to run some pretty sophisticated denoising algorithms all over the original render to turn this into this. It's a lot. So if even the most modern cards are going to struggle to render an entire game with ray tracing, what is even the point? Well, to start, every game with ray tracing support on the box does not rely solely on ray tracing. They use a combination of old, reliable rasterization techniques in combination with ray tracing in order to
Ray tracing, rasterization.
produce some incredibly good results. They use the old techniques to handle the stuff they've frankly always been really good at: depth, angles, and relationship to the player, while saving all that silicon melting ray tracing processes just to handle lighting and reflections, because rays are capable of all the things normal rastering isn't. Color bounce from surface to surface, multiple reflections, dynamic shadows that form naturally. These are effectively impossible without painstaking light mapping using traditional methods, but with ray tracing, it's a snap, and it looks way better. I don't like to future predict a lot, but I know when ray tracing was first announced to the consumer market years ago, there was a ton of speculation about whether or not it would take off, with good reason too. Ray tracing, as we've gone over, is a computational nightmare. So what's the benefit?
I like it. It's like, it's good, but it's a combination nightmare. Computation nightmare.
benefit? Well, it works. It's an incredibly reliable way to render graphics. It starts to take computer graphics out of the world of polygons and texture maps and more into the world of cinema with cameras, f-stops, and real lights, real depth of field, not simulated. It can also make game development a lot easier. You place a light and it behaves like a light should. I think ray tracing is here to stay in the mainstream. I really do. The question becomes, will we ever have games made solely with ray tracing? And I don't know the answer to that. Mixing traditional rasters with ray tracing saves a ton of resources, but who knows? Maybe someday NVIDIA will slap a ton of ray tracing chips in their cards and we'll be playing real-time Pixar games. Not anytime soon, though. And that is ray tracing. Holy smokes. And you know what? That's the bare bones explanation. There's a lot of stuff I just glossed over.
A lot of stuff just gloss over, just bare bones, surface area, tip of the iceberg stuff.
For the sake of making this video not 30 minutes long. And if you want to know more, there's a ton of really good stuff out there. I'd start with NVIDIA engineer Eric Haynes' lectures on the topic, which themselves are brief if you want to know more. It's where I started down this rabbit hole, although it's not where I ended up. Didn't I promise a rant? This is a long video. Okay, I'll do it really fast. I personally hate that we're calling rendering techniques that are not
Let's go!
ray tracing rasterization, because all rasterization is pixel information. All images sent to your screen are rasterized at some point. All of them! So ray trace graphics are still rasterized. I think this all happened because we started calling gaming graphics rasterizing because that's what it did, and we want to be sure that everyone knows that ray tracing is a truly new thing. But I really wish we'd call the old system legacy rasterizing or something, because it's really confusing to people who actually know what rasterization is. Sincerely, Austin.
Okay.
Wow, that was a doozy, so I'm gonna blitz through this one. My high-tier patrons, Matthew Ridge, Miss Kendra, Ronald Coleman, Alan Hagers, TP, Nicholas Spillinger, Marissa Resnick, Nick Patterson, and Loretta Mazer, along with viewers like you, have made this show possible, and it would not be here were it not for you guys and all my lovely patrons. If you made it this far and are somehow still around, we would love to have you as a patron. Just come on down. I'm gonna take a nap. Holy crap, this is a long episode.
Thank you so much for watching this video. This is a very long but educational, knowledgeable, and wisdom-filled video. I hope that you find this video very educational and beneficial for improvements, right? Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in my next video. Thank you so much for showing support, and I'm very grateful for it. Thank you. If you do like this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, comment, and follow. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye! But hey, that's just the signs. The signs of. Thanks for watching. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you do like this video, please remember to watch more of the videos from the YouTube channel Game Theorists. This video came out in the year 2021, literally a few months ago, last month. So thank you so much. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye, and thank you. If you do like my video, please remember to watch more of my videos. I'm a huge fan of the Game Theorists, so yeah, a huge fan. I noticed that. Fun fact, I noticed that my audience kind of like my ending to be fast. If it's too slow, they'll like skip it over. If it's fast, they're like, oh, wow, he's speaking very fast. It's like, okay. But you do know that I'm just saying all this without a script, right? Like literally there's nothing, there's no script involved. Okay. Room for improvements. But look, it's generic. It's generic. Yes, there's no teleprompter there. I mean, everything just going through my head. So let's try one more time. Thank you so much for watching this video. This video came out from the YouTube channel Game Theorists back in the year 2021. Hey, wait, that is this year. That is literally last month. If you do like this video, please remember to watch more of the videos. The videos are very educational and very knowledgeable. And I personally think that their videos are just awesome and entertaining and enjoyable to watch. They're just wonderful, remarkable individuals with incredible works. Thank you so much for me. I'm a huge fan of the work, so thank you. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye. Thank you so much. Oh, if you do like my videos, please remember to like, share, subscribe to my channel, and comment down below if you have anything to share with us. Do remember to follow my channel and sincerely appreciate all of your encouragement and appreciation for my work. Thank you. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye. Thank you so much. Subscribe. Breathe. Thank you. Breathe in, breathe out.